They tied her to his fence at sundown, not because she was guilty, but because they wanted to know whether Elias Whittaker still had a soul. The sky over Dry Mercy had turned the color of old copper, and the last light of day lay flat across the desert grass, catching on dust, saddle leather, and the long shadows of 3 riders waiting near the wash. Elias came home slow, his bay horse tired beneath him, a sack of coffee tied behind the saddle, one gloved hand resting loose on the reins. He saw the riders first. Then he saw the woman. She stood against the fence post beside his south gate, her hands bound with ranch rope, her dark hair falling across one cheek, her dress torn by thorns and hard travel, her chin lifted like no rope in the world could teach her shame. Around her neck hung a small plank of burned pine, scratched with 3 ugly words: thief, spy, Apache. Elias stopped 10 yards out. The wind moved through the dry grass with a sound like whispered judgment. One of the riders spit into the dirt and smiled. Brought you company, Whittaker. The other 2 laughed low, the way men laugh when they think the world belongs to them. Elias did not answer. He dismounted, boots touching the ground soft, spurs giving one tired clink. The woman watched him come closer. She was Apache, no doubt of that, with red-brown skin weathered by sun and wind, eyes black as storm water, and a stillness in her face that made the whole yard feel smaller. There was dust on her sleeves. A faint mark darkened her cheek. But she was standing straight. That was what Elias noticed most. Not the rope, not the sign, the way she refused to bend. When he was close enough to cut her loose, she looked him dead in the eye and spoke in a voice scraped dry by thirst. Do whatever you want, cowboy. The words landed harder than a drawn gun. Behind him, one rider chuckled. Hear that? She knows how this works. Elias turned his head just enough to see them. 3 men from town. Clay Mercer, Boone Rusk, and a young fool named Harlan Voss, all wearing Sunday courage on weekday faces. Who tied her here? Elias asked. Clay raised both hands like it was a joke. Town did. Sheriff said she was caught near stolen horses. Said you had the nearest fence and the least reputation to ruin. Boone leaned forward in his saddle. Best leave her there till morning. Folks need to see what happens when Apache trouble crosses the line. Elias looked back at the woman. Her wrists were held tight, but her face showed no pleading, only contempt. For the men. For him. Maybe for every white man who had ever called cruelty order and fear justice. A fly moved near the burned sign. The horse beside the gate shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried once and vanished into the red light. Elias took one step closer. The woman stiffened, ready for insult, ready for harm, ready for whatever lesson men thought they had the right to teach. Instead, Elias reached slowly for the knife at his belt. The riders stopped laughing. Clay's voice sharpened. Careful now, Whittaker. Elias opened the blade. I am careful. She bites, Harlan called. Elias slid the knife under the first rope without touching her skin. So do dogs, he said quietly. But I don't tie them to fences either. The rope fell. Then the second. The woman's hands came free, but she did not rub her wrists. She did not thank him. She only stepped away from the post on her own strength, as if gratitude was another kind of chain. Elias picked up the burned plank, read the words once, and let it drop into the dust between them. The 3 riders stared at him now, smiles gone, faces narrowing under their hat brims. In that silence, Elias understood the truth. This was never about stolen horses. This was a message nailed to his land, a match struck at the border between the town and the Apache hills. And by cutting that rope, he had just answered it. The riders did not leave right away. They sat there beyond the gate, 3 dark shapes in the last red light, watching Elias Whittaker like men memorizing a mistake. Clay Mercer was the first to turn his horse. Boone Rusk followed, slow and bitter, but Harlan Voss stayed a moment longer, his young face tight with the kind of anger that comes from being embarrassed in front of older men. Sheriff Pike will hear about this, Harlan said. Elias folded his knife and slipped it back into his belt. I expect he will. You always did like standing on the wrong side. Elias looked past him toward the town road, where dust still hung in the air like smoke that had forgotten how to rise. Wrong side of what? Harlan had no answer for that. Not one that sounded decent in the open air. He jerked his reins and rode after the others. Only then did the yard grow quiet again. Quiet, but not peaceful. The Apache woman stood beside the fence with her freed hands held close to her body. She had not moved more than 2 steps from the post. Her eyes followed the riders until they disappeared behind a low ridge. Then she looked at Elias as if he were only another danger wearing a calmer face. "You should have left me tied," she said. Her voice was low, steady, rough from dust. Elias picked up the burned plank by one edge and carried it to the porch. "That what you wanted? What I want does not matter here. It matters on my land." She almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. White men always say land is theirs after they draw a line across it. That one found its mark. Elias stood still with the plank in his hand. Behind him, the old ranch house leaned against the evening like it was tired of surviving. The barn roof had lost 3 shingles in the spring wind. The corral gate was mended with wire. 40 miles of scrub and stone surrounded the place, and not 1 mile of it had ever truly belonged to him. He had worked it, fenced it, bled sweat into it. But belonging was something deeper than a deed folded in a courthouse drawer. "You got a name?" he asked. She watched him for a long second. "Niyeli Red Feather." Elias repeated it once, carefully, not like a man owning the sound, but like a man setting down something fragile. "Elias Whittaker." "I know." That made him look at her. Niyeli's eyes shifted toward the distant hills, where the purple dark was gathering. "Apache children are warned about this ranch. The white scout who walks alone. The man who helped soldiers find canyon trails, then vanished when the songs turned sad." Elias said nothing. The words opened an old door inside him, and behind it was heat, dust, orders shouted by men who never stayed long enough to see what their orders cost. He had been 19 when he first worked as a scout, too young to understand that knowing the land could make him useful to men who did not love it. Too proud to see the difference between guidance and betrayal. Then came the morning near Black Mesa, when he saw wagons in the distance and heard a captain speak of women and children as if they were weather in the way. Elias walked away before noon. By sundown, every white man in Dry Mercy called him coward. By the next moon, every Apache camp had reason to call him worse. Since then, he had lived between 2 hatreds, trusted by neither, forgiven by no one. Niyeli studied his silence and seemed to understand enough not to press it. A coyote called far off. The first star appeared over the barn. Elias set the burned plank face down on the porch step. "Sheriff Pike send those men?" he asked. Pike tied the sign. Her answer came plain. The others tied the rope. Elias felt the night cool against the back of his neck. "What did they say you stole?" "Horses." "Did you?" "No. What were you doing near town?" For the first time, her face changed. "Not much. Just a small tightening around the eyes. Looking for a boy." Elias waited. Niyeli glanced toward the road where the riders had gone, then back at the darkening hills. "A stable boy. Thomas Bell." He saw something he was not meant to see. Before Elias could ask more, a sound rose from the direction of Dry Mercy. Not thunder. Hoofbeats. Many of them, coming fast through the dark. The hoofbeats came in broken rhythm, not like a patrol riding clean formation, but like men chasing a problem before it found a witness. Elias moved first. He took the lantern from the porch hook, turned the flame low, and set it inside the doorway where the light would not blind him. Niyeli noticed that. She noticed everything. The way he did not reach for his rifle. The way he stood with his body angled between her and the road, not as a shield exactly, but as a question no one had answered yet. "You know who is coming," she said. Elias listened to the horses drawing nearer through the dark. "I know who thinks he owns the road." Niyeli's gaze sharpened. "Pike." He nodded once. The name did not need more weight. Sheriff Amos Pike had worn a badge in Dry Mercy for 6 years, long enough to make fear look like law and law look like whatever kept him in charge. Folks tipped their hats to him in daylight and lowered their voices after dark. He had a soft way of speaking that made threats sound almost reasonable. That was the worst kind of man, Elias thought. The kind who never had to shout because others were already afraid. Niyeli stepped away from the fence and toward the shadow of the porch. Her freed hands were steady now, but Elias saw the faint marks the rope had left and the dust caught at her sleeves. She was tired. She would not admit it. He respected that enough not to mention it. "Inside," he said. She did not move. "I said I am not your prisoner." Elias looked at her. "Then stand where you choose. Just do not stand where fools can aim their pride at you." For a breath, the corner of her mouth shifted, almost a smile, then vanished. She moved to the side of the porch, half in shadow, half in lantern glow. That was all the trust she was willing to spend. The riders crested the rise a minute later. 12 horses, maybe 13. Their shapes rolled out of the night beneath the pale moon, hats low, coats moving in the wind. Sheriff Pike rode in front on a gray horse with a silver bridle, his badge catching what little light there was. Clay Mercer and Boone Rusk rode behind him, no longer laughing. Harlan Voss kept near the back, where young men hide when courage starts costing something. Pike stopped 30 feet from the gate. He looked first at the empty fence post, then at the rope on the ground, then at Elias. Evening, Whittaker. Elias did not answer. Pike let the silence stretch, as if he had brought enough men to own it. I left something here under lawful hold. You left a woman tied to my fence. I left a suspect secured until transport. Elias looked toward the riders behind him. Funny. Looked like a crowd teaching itself to be cruel. The men shifted in their saddles. Pike's face stayed calm. Too calm. That Apache woman is wanted for horse theft, trespass, and connection to a dead ranch hand found south of town. Niyeli stepped into clearer light. Say his name. Pike's eyes moved to her. What? If you use a dead man to build a lie, say his name. Something changed in the yard then. Small. Sharp. Boone glanced at Clay. Harlan looked down at his reins. Pike smiled without warmth. Silas Grant. Niyeli held his gaze. Silas Grant was alive when I last saw him. He was arguing with you behind the livery stable. The wind crossed the yard. Nobody spoke. Elias felt the night tighten around that sentence. Pike adjusted his gloves. You expect this rancher to believe Apache words over a sheriff? Niyeli looked at Elias, and for the first time since the fence, there was a question in her eyes. Not pleading, not fear. A test. Elias walked down the porch steps until his boots touched the dust near the fallen rope. I believe men who bring 12 riders to collect one tired woman are scared of something. Pike's smile disappeared. Behind the barn, a board creaked. Soft. Almost nothing. But Niyeli heard it, and so did Elias. A boy was hiding there in the dark, holding his breath like a match cupped from wind. The sound behind the barn was small enough for most men to miss, but fear has its own language, and Elias had heard it before. A board settling does not hold its breath. A horse does not tremble in a shadow. Someone was hiding there, close enough to hear every word, close enough to be the reason Sheriff Pike had ridden out under moonlight with half the town behind him. Pike noticed Elias looking past the barn and shifted in his saddle. Just a little. That was enough. You got rats in your hayloft, Whittaker? Pike asked. Elias kept his eyes on the sheriff. Only when town men ride over. A few riders muttered, but no one laughed. Niyeli stood near the porch rail, still as carved stone. Her attention had moved to the barn too, though her face gave nothing away. Elias understood then that she had not come near Dry Mercy for horses. She had come for whoever was hiding in his dark. A boy. Thomas Bell. The stable boy she had named. 13 years old, maybe 14 if hunger had shaved him small. Elias had seen him around the livery, carrying feed sacks too heavy for his frame, always looking down, always stepping aside for men who never thanked him. Bring the woman out, Pike said. This has gone far enough. Elias glanced at the fallen rope in the dirt. It went too far before I got home. Pike leaned forward. His voice stayed smooth, but the softness had worn thin. You are not a judge. Neither is a fence. The words sat between them. Then Clay Mercer moved his horse one step toward the porch. Niyeli turned her head, and Clay stopped. Not because she reached for a weapon. She had none. Not because she threatened him. She did not speak. He stopped because some people carry a line around them that decent men do not cross and guilty men fear to touch. Pike saw it and grew colder. You think dignity changes charges? He asked her. Niyeli looked at him. No. Truth does. At that moment, from behind the barn, came the faint scrape of a boot. Harlan Voss heard it this time. His face paled under the moon. Pike's hand tightened on his reins. Search the barn, he ordered. 2 riders dismounted, but Elias stepped into their path before they reached the gate. He did it slow. No suddenness. No performance. Just one man placing his body where his conscience had already gone. Nobody searches my barn without saying what they are looking for. Pike's eyes sharpened. Aiding an Apache suspect is one thing. Hiding a witness is another. There it was. Witness. The word slipped out clean and fatal. Even Pike heard it after he said it. Boone Rusk turned his head toward the sheriff. Clay looked down. Harlan swallowed hard. Niyeli's gaze cut through the yard and fixed on Pike like a thrown knife without a blade. Elias let the silence grow until it became heavier than accusation. "Witness to what?" he asked. Pike sat frozen for half a breath, then tried to smile. "To whatever lies this woman has been spreading." "I have not told him anything yet," Niyeli said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "You did that yourself." The riders behind Pike shifted again, less like a posse now, more like men beginning to wonder whether they had followed the wrong lantern into the dark. The barn creaked once more. This time, a thin voice came from inside. "Mr. Whittaker?" Elias did not turn around. "Stay where you are, Thomas." The whole yard changed. Pike's gray horse tossed its head, as if even the animal felt the rope tighten around the night. Thomas Bell stepped into the open anyway, clutching something flat beneath his coat. His face was dusty, his shirt torn at one sleeve, and his eyes were wide with the terrible knowledge of a child who had learned too early that grown men could be afraid of the truth. Niyeli moved first, not toward escape, but toward the boy, placing herself between him and the riders. Pike stared at the object under Thomas's arm. "Boy," he said, and now the softness was gone. "You best hand that over." Thomas looked at Elias, then at Niyeli, then at the sheriff. "I cannot," he whispered. "It has your name in it." The words did not sound large when Thomas Bell said them. They sounded small, almost swallowed by the wind, but they struck the yard harder than any shout. "I cannot. It has your name in it." Sheriff Pike sat high on his gray horse, and for the first time that night, his badge looked less like law and more like a piece of tin catching moonlight. Thomas held the flat object tighter beneath his coat. Elias saw the corner of it then, a ledger, its cover scorched along one edge, its pages tied with a strip of feed twine. Not a weapon, not gold, just paper. But every guilty man in the yard seemed suddenly afraid of it. Pike smiled at the boy, gentle as a church bell. "Thomas, you are tired. You have been running, and this Apache woman has filled your head with stories." Niyeli stood in front of Thomas without touching him. Her shoulders were square, her chin lifted, the marks of rope still plain at her wrists. "I found him behind the livery," she said. "He was hiding under oat sacks while your men searched the stalls." Pike looked at her with quiet hate. "You expect them to believe you protected a white boy out of kindness?" Niyeli did not blink. "I expect them to ask why he needed protecting." That question moved through the riders like a cold draft under a door. Boone Rusk looked toward Thomas. Clay Mercer shifted his hat lower. Harlan Voss stared at the ground as if the dirt might open and spare him from choosing. Elias took one step closer to the boy. "Thomas, what is in the ledger?" The boy looked at Pike, and all the courage drained from his face. But Niyeli spoke softly without turning around. "Tell it straight. Truth does not need a loud voice." Thomas swallowed. "Names, dates, horses sold after dark, army brands filed off, payments made through the back room at Mercer's store." Clay's head snapped up. Pike's smile vanished. The night seemed to hold its breath. "That is enough," Pike said. Elias shook his head once. "No, that is the first honest thing said since sundown." Pike's hand moved to rest near his holster, not drawing, only reminding. Elias did not reach for anything. That was what made the moment dangerous. Not a gun, a refusal. "You are standing between this town and order," Pike said. Elias glanced at Niyeli, then at Thomas, then at the burned sign lying in his dust. "No," he said. "I am standing between a boy and the men who mistook fear for order." From the ridge beyond the south pasture came a low sound. Not thunder, not wind. Horses, many horses. The riders near Pike turned in their saddles. One by one, shapes appeared along the dark line of the hill, still as black stones against the stars. 10 at first, then 30, then more than a man could count from the yard. Apache riders, silent, watching. Niyeli closed her eyes for half a breath, as if she had known they were near and had prayed they would not be needed. Pike's men lost their straight backs. Clay whispered something under his breath. Harlan backed his horse 2 steps. But no Apache warrior raised a weapon. No cry split the night. No charge came down the hill. Their silence was worse for the guilty than anger would have been. It gave every lie room to echo. Thomas slowly pulled the ledger from beneath his coat and held it out, not to Pike, not to Elias, but to Niyeli. She took it with both hands, careful as if carrying a sleeping child. Then she turned and placed it on Elias's porch rail, where the lantern light touched the burned cover. "You tied me to a fence," she said to Pike, "because you thought I had no people." She looked toward the ridge. "You were wrong." The ridge held its silence, and that silence changed every man beneath it. Sheriff Pike looked from the Apache riders to the ledger on Elias Whittaker's porch rail, then back to Thomas Bell, as if a child, a woman, and a stack of scorched paper had somehow become more dangerous than all his borrowed authority. The lantern flame moved behind the glass. It laid gold across the ledger's burned cover, across Niyeli Red Feather's steady hands, across the old rope still curled in the dust by the fence post. Nobody picked up that rope now. Nobody wanted to be seen near it. Pike cleared his throat, trying to gather the night back into his pocket. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. The words sounded weak before it reached the gate. Elias looked at him. "A misunderstanding does not ride out with 12 men. Boone Rusk shifted in his saddle. Clay Mercer stared at the porch rail as if he could burn the ledger by hating it hard enough. Harlan Voss had gone pale, his hat brim trembling just a little in the wind. From the hill, the Apache riders remained still. Not one came forward. Not one made a threat. They did not need to. Their presence had done what shouting never could. It had made the town hear itself. Pike tried again, this time softer. "Thomas, son, you do not understand what you read. Men keep records for all kinds of business. A boy can mistake numbers for crimes." Thomas stood behind Niyeli, small in the moonlight, but his voice came clearer than before. "I can read names, Sheriff." Pike's jaw tightened. "Careful. I read mine too," Thomas said. "Beside a payment. $5 for silence." The yard went cold. Even the horses seemed to settle into stillness. Elias turned slowly toward the boy. "Did he pay you?" Thomas shook his head. "He offered. After I saw Mr. Grant arguing behind the livery. After I saw the horses moved at night." He swallowed hard. "I ran before they could make me take it." Niyeli did not look surprised. She only looked sad, in that old way people look when truth proves exactly as cruel as expected. Elias picked up the ledger. The cover left a faint black mark on his fingers. He opened it under the lantern, careful with the brittle pages. Names, dates, brands, payments. He did not read them aloud yet. He did not have to. Clay Mercer spoke first, his voice rough. "Amos, tell him it is not what it looks like." Pike turned on him with a glance sharp enough to cut speech short. But it was too late. Men who had followed Pike for certainty now found themselves standing in doubt. And doubt is a hard horse to turn once it knows the road. Elias closed the ledger and held it against his chest. "This goes to the territorial judge in Santa Fe." Pike gave a small laugh. "You think you will get there?" Elias did not move. "I think I will try." Niyeli stepped beside him then, close enough that the lantern lit the red beads at her throat, beads Elias had not noticed before. One bead, darker than the rest, hung near the center, polished smooth by years of touch. Elias stared at it, and the whole night seemed to slip backward. Sand in his mouth, sun burning white, a woman's hands lifting his head, water against his lips. A red bead pressed into his palm before she vanished into heat and wind. Niyeli saw him looking. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but recognition beginning to wake. "Where did you see that before?" she asked. Elias's voice came out low. "A woman gave me one when I was a boy." Niyeli's face changed. "Just once. Just enough." "Her name?" He looked at the bead, then at her. "Atzela." The Apache riders on the ridge did not move, but Niyeli did. She took one step back, as if the name had opened a door beneath her feet. The ledger, the sheriff, the stolen horses, all of it remained. But now another truth stood in the yard, older than Pike's lie and stronger than the rope that had held her. Niyeli Red Feather did not speak for a long moment after Elias said her mother's name. The night kept moving around them, whined through dry grass, leather creaking under nervous riders, the faint chime of a bridle on the ridge where the Apache waited like shadows given breath. But inside the small circle of lantern light, time had stopped. "Say it again," Niyeli whispered. Elias looked at the red bead at her throat, then at the woman wearing it. "Atzela," he said. "She found me east of Black Mesa. I was 11. My father's wagon had broken down, and I wandered after a dust devil, thinking I could see water where there was none. I do not remember falling. I remember waking with her hand under my head." Niyeli's face stayed strong, but something in her eyes loosened. She carried a white boy, far enough to save him, and left you a bead. Elias reached into the small leather pouch tied inside his coat. His fingers found what they had found on lonely nights for 18 years, a single red bead, worn smooth, darker than dried clay. He held it out on his open palm. The porch lantern touched it, and Niyeli drew in a quiet breath. Not fear, not surprise, recognition. That was from her mourning strand, she said. She only gave those to people she chose to remember. Elias closed his hand around the bead, not hiding it, protecting it from the wind. I never knew why. Niyeli looked toward the ridge, where an older Apache rider sat apart from the others on a paint horse. His gray braids moved against his shoulders. Even from the yard, his stillness carried authority. Because my mother believed a life saved becomes part of your own, she said. My father called that weakness. Elias followed her gaze. Chief Chaska. Niyeli nodded. He remembers every trail you walked with soldiers. So do I. The answer was plain, and it cost him something to say it. Niyeli heard that cost. So did Thomas Bell, standing small behind her with both hands tucked beneath his arms against the cold. Sheriff Pike heard none of it. Men like Pike could stand inside a miracle and still look for a way to profit from it. Touching family history, Pike said, forcing a thin laugh. But it does not change charges. Elias turned back to him. The ledger rested under his arm. The red bead lay in his palm. Between them stood Niyeli, a woman who had been tied to his fence by men who thought a rope could decide her worth. No, Elias said. The ledger changes charges. Pike's face hardened. That book is stolen property. Thomas found his voice. It was hidden in the livery stove. I pulled it out before the fire caught. Clay Mercer swore under his breath. Too late, and loud enough. Every rider heard it. Pike slowly looked at Clay, and in that glance the posse began to understand that guilt has a scent. It moves from man to man until nobody can pretend not to smell it. From the ridge, Chief Chaska lifted one hand. The Apache riders began to descend, not fast, not threatening, just moving with the quiet certainty of people who had waited long enough. Pike's men tightened in their saddles. Elias raised his free hand without looking away from the sheriff. Nobody needs to make this night uglier than it already is. Niyeli stepped forward. My people did not come for war. Her voice carried farther than Elias expected. They came because I did not return. Chief Chaska stopped at the gate, still mounted. His eyes moved over the fallen rope, the burned sign, Thomas, the ledger, then Elias. White Scout, he said. Elias held the old bead where the chief could see it. Chaska's expression changed only slightly, but the change was enough to silence even the wind. Niyeli spoke in Apache, soft and quick. Elias understood only one word. Atzala. The chief listened. Then he looked at Elias again, no forgiveness in his face, but something older than forgiveness. Measurement. Pike tried to interrupt. Chief, this woman is in my custody. Chaska did not look at him. A woman tied to a fence is in no man's custody. She is in his shame. No one answered. Not Clay. Not Boone. Not Harlan. Not even Pike. The words settled over dry mercy like dust after a long ride, and every man there had to breathe them in. The shame sat heavier than any charge Sheriff Pike had brought with him. It moved through the yard without hurry, touching every rider who had followed him out of dry mercy, touching the rope in the dust, touching the burned sign on the porch step, touching even the old fence post that had held Niyeli Red Feather while men told themselves they were serving law. Chief Chaska remained at the gate, mounted and silent after his words. Behind him, Apache riders waited in a long, dark line, not pressing forward, not reaching for trouble, simply present in a way that made lies feel crowded. Pike looked smaller now, though he had not moved. His badge still shone, but the shine had turned thin. This is my jurisdiction, he said. The sentence sounded tired before it finished. Elias Whittaker opened the ledger again beneath the lantern. Then you will not mind hearing what happened in it. Pike's eyes narrowed. You read one page out loud, and you will regret it. Thomas Bell flinched, but Niyeli placed one hand lightly in front of him, not touching his chest, only showing him where courage could stand. Elias looked down at the brittle paper. April 3rd. 6 horses with army brands delivered after midnight. Payment received by Amos Pike through Clay Mercer. Clay closed his eyes. Boone Rusk whispered, Lord help us. Elias turned another page. April 17th. 2 gray mares listed stolen from Grant pasture, then sold under altered marks 3 days later. He paused. Signed again by Pike. Harlan Voss made a small sound and backed his horse away from the group, as if distance could wash off obedience. Pike's calm finally cracked. Not into rage. Into fear, which was quieter and far less dignified. "Those pages are false," he said. Niyeli looked at him. "Then why did you tie a woman to a fence instead of bringing her before a judge?" No one answered. Not because the question was difficult. Because it was not. Chief Chaska dismounted then. Slowly. His boots met the dust with almost no sound. Every rider watched him cross the yard to the fence post. He bent and picked up the rope. For one long breath, Elias thought the chief might hand it to Pike, might demand a price the knight could not pay. Instead, Chaska walked to Thomas Bell and placed the rope in the boy's hands. Thomas stared at it, confused and frightened. Chaska spoke in careful English. "This is what they used when they thought no one would speak." He then pointed to the ledger. "That is what you carried when you did." Thomas's chin trembled, but he did not cry. He held the rope like a thing already losing its power. Pike turned his horse toward the road. He had no speech left, so he chose movement. But Boone Rusk rode into his path. Then Harlan. Then, after a long and bitter hesitation, Clay Mercer. None of them drew weapons. They did not need to. They had simply stopped following. In the West, that can be enough to end a man. Elias closed the ledger and handed it to Thomas. "You keep hold of this until morning." Thomas shook his head. "What if they come for it?" Niyeli answered before Elias could. "Then they will have to walk past all of us." The word "us" changed the air. Elias heard it. Chaska heard it. Pike heard it too, and it told him more clearly than any sentence that the night had slipped from his hands. The sheriff sat there under the moon, boxed in not by guns, but by witnesses. A boy, a woman, a rancher, a chief, men who had finally remembered their own eyes. Far off, the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern rim of the desert. It was not morning yet, but the dark had begun losing its argument. By the time dawn reached the Whittaker ranch, nobody was laughing anymore. The sky turned pale over the eastern flats, gray first, then gold, and the long shadows of horses stretched across the yard like the last marks of a bad dream. Sheriff Amos Pike sat with his hands resting on his saddle horn, surrounded by men who had ridden out as his posse and now looked at him as if seeing a stranger in a borrowed coat. Boone Rusk took Pike's reins. Harlan Voss would not meet his eyes. Clay Mercer sat stiff and silent, already understanding that the ledger on Thomas Bell's lap had weight enough to drag more than one name into daylight. No one shouted. No one begged. That was the strange mercy of it. The truth did not need noise. It simply stood there until every lie grew tired. Elias Whittaker walked to the fence post where Niyeli Red Feather had been tied only hours before. The rope was gone now, held by Thomas like proof that even a weak thing can become strong when placed in honest hands. The burned sign still lay face down near the porch. Elias picked it up, brushed dirt from its edge, and looked once at the words carved into it. Thief, spy, Apache. He did not read them aloud. Some words lose power when decent people refuse to repeat them. Chief Chaska came beside him and held out his hand. Elias gave him the sign. The old chief studied it without anger, then broke it across his knee. The crack moved through the yard sharper than a gavel. 2 pieces fell into the dust. "Now," Chaska said, "it tells the truth." Niyeli stood near the gate, the red beads at her throat moving gently in the morning wind. Her eyes rested on Elias, then on the single bead in his palm, the one her mother had given him 18 years before. She stepped closer, slow enough that neither pride nor gratitude had to hurry. "My mother said a saved life walks with 2 shadows," she said. "The one it was born with, and the one it owes." Elias closed his fingers around the bead. "I have been carrying hers a long time." "No," Niyeli said quietly. "You have been carrying the chance to become worthy of it." He had no answer. Maybe there was not supposed to be one. Thomas climbed onto Boone's spare horse with the ledger wrapped inside his coat. At sunrise, they would ride for the territorial judge in Santa Fe, nearly 80 miles of dust, risk, and hard truth. Pike would ride with them, no longer leading. That was justice enough for the morning. Before Niyeli mounted, she returned to the fence post. From her necklace, she loosened one red bead and tied it there with a thin strip of leather. Not as decoration, not as a promise. As memory. The bead swayed where the rope had been. Elias watched it catch the sun. Niyeli looked at him one last time. Now this fence remembers something else. Then she rode with her people toward the Apache hills, and Elias did not call after her. He only stood beside the broken sign while the wind moved through the yard, soft and clean. From that day on, travelers passing the south gate of the Whittaker ranch slowed their horses when they saw the red bead shining on the fence. Some said it marked a debt repaid. Some said it marked a warning. But Elias knew better. Out there, justice did not always come with a gunshot or a hanging rope. Sometimes it came as a woman standing straight, a boy telling the truth, and a single red bead